Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of outsider music, looking at music that comes from people from outside of both the mainstream world of music and academia, really bringing oddities to the art form. We've checked out a couple different artists this week already, both who have kind of been on both sides of the spectrum, more palatable and more avant-garde, and I think we're swinging back to the avant-garde today with some more Captain Beefheart. We've checked out one of his tracks before. It is one of the few times I've had very, very little to say about a track. Now that I know what I'm in for, though, I'm hoping to have a little bit more to discuss, even if it's not about the music itself, but about music in general. So let's dive into this and see what Captain Beefheart is bringing to the table today.
I cried, I can't buy your veterans day poppy. It don't get me high, it can only make me cry. It can never grow another sun like the one who warmed me. My days after rain and warm my breath, my life's blood screaming empty. She cries, it don't get me high, it can only make me cry. You're a veteran day poppy.
Ah, man, I don't know, man. All right, for everybody who's a massive fan of this and can't bear to listen to criticism about their favorite music, just duck out right now. I got so much hate comments last time we had Captain Beefheart on the channel. And I'll admit, that wasn't my brightest moment. But I stand by most of what I said because it's present here as well. It's just nonsense. I could give it a beneficial read if I wanted to approach it from pure avant-garde music and talk about, well, I will. I will talk about some of the stuff it does because it does some cool things in a vacuum. But the overall product feels like it is rock adjacent experimentation for the sake of experimentation, which I'm fine with the idea of experimenting just to see where you can push art. But I don't think that that typically leads to something worthwhile. It tends to take you to a place of understanding that you can utilize to create great art. At best, this could be a first draft or an experimental concept to build a further work of art off of. It is by itself not. I'm really trying to watch my words here because I don't want anyone to think that I'm against experimentation or avant garde music in general, but there's definitely a divide between the experimentation you do to get past a mental roadblock or a writer's block or to just push your own music, the exercises you would do to get outside of your comfort and your norms as a composer, and the experimentation that you would put out for the world to listen to. It's the same reason why even your greatest musicians, they don't release their warm-up tapes. They don't record their warm-ups. I mean, it's not something that has much value outside of uh well, pure academia. I would love to, and actually I have, listened to warm ups from trumpet players that I've looked up to in order to emulate them in my own warm up. But as a commercial piece to release for people to buy and enjoy, the warm ups aren't it. There is a value to them, but not one that is the one that's traditionally held when we approach music as an art form. And that's where I view both of Captain Beefheart's tracks so far. They're interesting experimentation. They push the boundaries of music, but should they have been released in a commercial product or should they have been expanded upon, utilized as a jumping off board or a blueprint for something else? And I think they are in the latter. There are some interesting ideas here, but to me, there's not enough meat on the bone to be something that intrigues me. I would like to see what they did if this was a blueprint, if this was the foundation to a larger work, instead of it just being the work itself. It just lacks the depth to it. So let's get into what this is doing. Because like I said, it's not terrible. It's just anemic. So we have odd harmonic ideas. This entire piece is based around dyads between our guitars, occasionally vocals that, I mean, they do add to the harmonic quality. We end up getting triads for the 30 seconds the vocals are there. Um, we have drums that are they're keeping a beat. They're way outside of the bounds of working rhythmically with either of the other instruments, but at least they're keeping a type of pulse, and the song has a steady tempo to it that the drums are sitting within. Um, the guitars frequently feel out of tune. It introduces a microtonality to the piece. And for the first and third sections, at least, the guitars are not playing anything close to what the other is playing. However, in the third, we have a minor alteration to that in that they're playing different lines, but kind of working off of each other in some capacity, and a couple of beats, I think, more specifically. And so, giving them the benefit of the doubt, our first section is working with the ideas of counterpoint and microtonality, and our third section is working off of the ideas of variation and, to a slight degree, canon. I don't want to lean into that too heavily. It is a very loose idea of canon, primarily because the two instruments are not playing the exact same thing, but there is an idea of canon going on in which the right guitar starts the idea, and 2 beats later, the left guitar comes in with a very similar line. They also end 2 beats apart. It's not a perfect canon, but it utilizes some of the ideas of it. Again, introducing concepts of odd harmony and microtonality. Our middle section feels like it's trying to be pretty straightforward rock, shifting over with our left guitar doing chords, pretty standard riffs for a 70s style of rock. And the right guitar is, honestly, I don't know what it was doing. It was very quiet for some reason. It was difficult to hear what it was doing, but it wasn't completely silent over there either, but it was certainly not doing the chords we were hearing on the left. It just comes together into this track that is filled with a bunch of individual elements that rarely have much to do with each other, and rhythmically, harmonically, melodically just don't connect most of the time. The best read I can give it is that it sits in the realm of avant-garde, pushing the boundaries of music into realms that most people aren't used to listening to. And with avant-garde music, I tend to be kind of 50-50 on this. Sometimes I deeply connect with the oddities of the sound, and other times I find nothing to connect with. I don't think I've ever listened to anything in the avant-garde or experimental realm that I've been in the middle about. It's either something that I get or something I don't. Even stranger is going back to the vocals. I feel like I've hyper focused on the guitars here, but the vocals are cyclical in a way that never leads to resolution. In fact, when we do push towards a place that should have a sort of stopping point, either rhythmically or harmonically, it just kind of cycles back and redoes what it just did. It feels completely out of place given the loops and cycles and riffs that the guitars are playing at the moment and the patterns that the drums are playing for the vocals to be completely out of place. Again, a beneficial read would be something along the lines of introducing polyrhythmic ideas to the band that's already focused in on a specific phrasing. But I just don't get that perception from the work. And that's a totally subjective component to this, right? And something that we approached talking about yesterday is, where do you divide the line of intention and execution? Does prior, well, actually, not does, prior knowledge does impact an understanding of a work. context is important, and I understand the context of how this album was created, and it certainly paints things in a bit of a negative light. There's a lot of elements in here that are left up to chance in a way that the end result is avant-garde, but not from the perspective of somebody wanting to make something evocative, but somebody just allowing a random number generator basically to form it. It's, again, it feels like an exercise. We've actually done this in the past for the composition jam, is to use dice rolls to dictate time signatures and how long you sit in a time signature, how many bars you're in it. The music ends up feeling odd, and it's a challenge to make all these time signatures flow together in a way that makes any sort of sense. And even some of the better pieces that came out of that jam still felt a bit disconnected. It was an interesting exercise, but not something I think any of us were willing to put on an album. And again, I keep coming back to this. This is an interesting idea. I like the concept of how most of these songs were created. Uh, I don't really enjoy what happened to these musicians during this session, and I wish the art would speak for itself, but it kind of doesn't. It continues to be odd music for odd music's sake, created through entropy, and it's a fantastic exercise. It's a great way to break out a writer's block. It doesn't really make great art, though. I'm going to hit some lyrics and see what we come out on the other side of this, but I'm not expecting anything wildly. I don't expect any wild perspective changes from it. Alright, this is interesting. The lyrics are not nonsensical. I don't know if I would necessarily have picked this up without the little bit of context, but it's about Poppy Day, which is a day of remembrance in the UK. It marks the end of the First World War. And so we have a person who is very upset during Poppy Day because it reminds them of their son who presumably died at war. And that's the whole thing. I cry, but I won't buy your poppies. It's celebrated by, what was this information? Red poppies are traditionally bought as a tribute and donation to the Army's trust. Yep. So our main character can't buy the poppies because it makes them cry, and because poppies can't grow another son. That's the whole thing. There's like 8 lines here. From that perspective, some of the music makes a little bit more sense. If we want to look at somebody who's emotionally falling apart, the music is definitely falling apart in many situations. It's interesting then that as soon as the last vocal line happens, which is a repeat of the idea, it will only make me cry, your Veterans Day Poppy, we move from that into some 70s funky rock and roll. A very distorted version of it. But yeah. And so once again, I can give a positive read to the eclecticness of the harmonic choices being the falling apart of somebody emotionally. But there's also a duality through a lot of this where the two guitars are consistently doing two wildly different things that I don't think is showcased in this track, unless you want to look at it as, everybody else celebrating versus this parent. But that doesn't feel like a strong read given what the music is doing with this duality, which is creating contrast. I wouldn't say either one of the guitars feels like it's at home tonally with the track, and the other one is atonal or working outside the bounds of the key. They're both odd. So the division between the two isn't really a division. They work together to build a whole, and the only whole I can see from that is dissonance. The dissonance within this parent. Again, I think this is a very generous read of what's going on here, but at least it kind of works in some capacity, though the ending is just continues to lean into what they've been doing in a more avant-garde fashion rather than utilizing rock and roll as a foundation. And it ends up feeling a bit long in the tooth, given that it takes up the last half of the track and doesn't really attempt to do anything new throughout those moments. I do think it's interesting, though, that it mentions that this was one of three tracks that was already existing prior to recording, what is this, Trout Mask Replica, which is why it is a bit more traditional. It still has an odd harmonic quality, and rhythmically it's a bit all over the place, but it is a bit more cohesive than what we checked out last time, which. Oh, Frownland. So now we've listened to the first and last track on this album. And that cohesion comes from, apparently, the fact that, it's an older track when it wasn't trying to be as experimental. Yeah, I guess that's my final thoughts on this. It's not anything I want to listen to again. I'm sure I'm going to see a ton of comments telling me I don't get the track, and that it's actually a work of genius, and that's perfectly fine. I got sent a ton of links last time on Frownland explaining why it was actually a lot better than I gave it credit for, and I walked away from those videos with a little bit more appreciation, but overall, I don't get it. I don't get the appeal of it at all, other than just people wanting to like weird music for weird sake, which is okay. I like a lot of music that isn't genius work either. And I don't go around touting that it's the best thing since sliced bread. I think it's okay to enjoy odd music. It doesn't need to be a work of art to enjoy it, and it doesn't need to be world changing just because it's strange. It can sometimes just be weird and something you like, and I think people need to be okay with that. uh, but again, I'm going to repeat this one final time. Aside from the objective looks at what is actually going on here, the few other comments I made are subjective. Those are my opinions on it. You can't tell me my opinion is wrong, just like I can't tell you your opinion is wrong. Alright, we're going to wrap this one up. Those are my thoughts on Captain Beefheart's Veterans Day Poppy. I'm sure we'll hear more from this person, although I'd rather not. Primarily because it's not even about the music, honestly. It's really about how the music was created. It kind of puts Beefheart in an area of uh, a group of artists I don't like giving a spotlight to because of the way that they went about crafting their art. Um, so I do want to put this little thing here. There was a bit of psychological abuse going on with his magic band, and we had a lot of discussion on it in Frownland, the Frownland reaction. We talked a little bit about it in the Discord, I think. I got some emails about it, and I went and read some articles from the musicians themselves talking about their times, recording this album. It is not something I like to promote, so I will put this little disclaimer here at the end that the music was created under stressful circumstances that should not have happened at all. And for that, I am not a big fan of Beefheart as a person. But we will check this song out, and if there's any others, we'll probably continue to check out Captain Beefheart, but I will continue to put that disclaimer somewhere in the video. So yeah, let's wrap this up. Leave me your comments. Description box has link to Linktree. You can find everything in there, my music, ways to support the channel, all sorts of stuff. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. And that wraps this one up. We have a special selection coming up next. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, with the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.